From Dana Altman and Brad Underwood to Louisville women's basketball's tough loss on the road at North Carolina, and finally a little baseball preview for the upcoming season. There's a lot of stuff to talk about on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, so let's get right on into it.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, and I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. We'll start out talking on this episode about, some more coaching search candidates in Oregon's Dana Altman. Illinois' Brad Underwood will transition into analyzing the Louisville women's basketball's tough loss on the road in Chapel Hill against the ranked North Carolina Tar Heels on Thursday evening. And then we'll conclude the show with a little preview for the upcoming baseball season for Louisville. We'll start out with some coaching search talk. This episode will be dedicated to Oregon's Dana Altman, Illinois' Brad Underwood, two names that probably have been talked about the least as a whole from the Louisville fan base, at least on the social media side of things. The reality is we've talked pretty much in depth about almost all of the other candidates, so this truly may be the last coaching search installment on the show until we get some more concrete information. Now, I know that Josh Hurd was on 93.9 The Ville, the Louisville interim athletic director, on Thursday morning. Basically alluded to the fact that the program doesn't necessarily have the luxury to wait to make an April hire. So many took that as it possibly being a hire at the conclusion of the Cardinals season, which many took as it being kind of code for, okay, Kenny Payne fits that timeline, and an insinuation that others would be then planning for the big dance and the NCAA tournaments with their respective teams. But ultimately, outside of Kenny, there really hasn't been many names that have been kind of brought to the forefront and talked about more than just the initial introductions into this coaching search talk, outside of maybe Bruce Pearl, but early on he got an extension. So we're continuing to go down the line. Dana Altman, Brad Underwood, two very solid coaches. I think both, for the record, both would succeed here at Louisville. I feel more comfortable with a hire of Dana Altman rather than Brad Underwood. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about why here in just a second. I don't necessarily obviously know how feasible it is, considering Josh Hurd is keeping things very close to vest. The Louisville athletic department keeping things very close to vest. So not necessarily a ton of information out there. The consensus is that Kenny Payne's likely still the favorite and stuff like that. But for the sake of the hypothetical realm, we'll talk about these candidates on this episode and how good of candidates they would be at Louisville. For the record, I am a huge fan of Dana Altman. I think he is one of the most underrated coaches in college basketball. A very, very solid X's and O's guy. He's great in terms of designing set pieces. His teams compete on both ends of the court, with high tenacity. Defensively, they press. They force you to turn the ball over. And, offensively, you never know what you're going to get. It's all about running plays. They utilize the mid-range. In today's society, it seems like the mid-range is kind of the forgotten art, so to speak. So I think that, Dana Altman is great in terms of, getting guys into the right scheme and things like that. He's a solid recruiter. He's shown that he can recruit 5-star guys, high 4-star guys. I feel like most of the concern with Dana Altman, there's two things. Number one, his age. And number two is I feel like it's ignorance, and I'm not, it's not a shot at any of the Louisville fan base or any of its members. It's more so, defining ignorance as, just not knowing much about him, because he does coach on the West Coast. Oregon is a team that plays late at night. Not a lot of people really get to see them play a ton unless it's a primetime Pac-12 matchup, maybe on Saturday night or something like that. But ultimately, I want to read something that Jeff Goodman from Watch Stadium put out right after the buyout agreement with Chris Mack got announced. And I quote, in context, he's talking about some different options and who could be on the table. Oregon's Dana Altman is a Midwest guy and a terrific coach who was close to leaving the Northwest for Nebraska a few years ago, but I'm not sure his personality fits what Louisville needs right now. I'm not disagreeing with what Jeff said, partly because I'm not necessarily sure what he means by that in terms of what I guess I would have to get a definition on what he believes, or an explanation, I should say, not necessarily a definition, but explanation of what he means by not being a culture fit. Because I would argue that he is everything that Louisville needs. He's a solid recruiter. He might not necessarily be an inspiring hire, because we'll talk about that ignorance here in just a second. He's a great X's and O's coach. He's a guy that's a fiery personality on the sidelines. I think that he would do extremely well in the locker room and be able to get his guys to play with each other. One thing he also is very good at is roster construction. He's very good at meshing together a roster filled with JUCO guys, transfers, highly rated recruits, project type of players. Etc. He does a very good job of roster cohesion. When I talk about, I guess we can, before we, talk about the ignorance aspect of things, he is 63 years old. He's making $3.5 million per year. His buyout's about $4 million. So there are some questions of, okay, would he be an option for Louisville? Well, would he, if he was definitely looking to leave Nebraska? Now, he is a Nebraska native, so that might be why he was looking to leave for Nebraska. Excuse me. But, being a Midwest guy, I wouldn't count it out of him leaving the Midwest. The Northwest. It really just depends on what his priorities are. He has been at Oregon, since 2010, so over a decade. This late in his career, is he looking to, relocate? Is he looking to, build Louisville up? Money-wise, you would have to assume that Oregon would match anything that Louisville respectively threw at Altman. So it really would just be a matter of preference. If you are not on the Kelvin Sampson train because he's 66 years old, chances are you aren't on the Dana Altman train because he is 63. So there are those concerns, but also the ignorance, aspect of things. Like I said, it's not necessarily a shot at Louisville fans. It's more so just kind of a, me believing that there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know how Dana Altman operates and just how good of a coach he is. He was solid at Creighton from 94 to 2010. He then goes to Oregon, where he's a 3-time Pac-12 Coach of the Year. He's a guy that has gotten the team to multiple conference tournaments, won multiple, conference championships. Been to the NCAA tournament a handful of times. Made the Final Four in 2016-17 with a sleeper team, a Cinderella team, so to speak. Well, not really necessarily Cinderellas. I think they were. They weren't necessarily, I forget what they were ranked in that season, but they were very, very good. Dylan Brooks, Chris Boucher, all those guys. So he's a guy that's gotten deep in the NCAA tournament, has a better resume than some of the other guys that are that Louisville fans are talking about. So I think that Dana Altman would be a great possible hire. Brad Underwood, on the other hand, there's no doubt that he is a winner. At Stephen F. Austin, I think tied Brad Stevens for the most career wins in the first 3 years of a coaching career. I think he had 89, went to the tournament all 3 times with Stephen F. Austin. 1 year at Oklahoma State before he got poached by Illinois. 2 years to where he didn't make the tournament, 2 losing seasons. He switches up his coaching philosophy the year after that, in favor of maybe a little bit more of an analytical approach, relying on, some younger minds, innovative minds. He's a guy that's very solid X's and O's as well, solid recruiter, not too shabby in terms of developing talent. The issue with Brad Underwood, in my opinion, is that, he is 58. I'm okay with, hiring a guy that's, maybe not necessarily Kelvin Sampson's age, because when, the difference between 66 and 63 is a big difference when you talk about coaching years. 66 to 58 is just an even bigger difference. The issue is the money that Illinois forked over to Underwood. He just received another extension that extends his contract through 2026 and 27. He is making over $4 million right now. He's a top 10 paid coach in America. He has an $8 million buyout. So feasibility-wise, I don't necessarily see Brad Underwood being an option. Even if Louisville were interested, it's kind of one of those things like, okay, he hasn't necessarily shown you too awful much to really warrant, forking over that money. On the other hand, Dana Altman, I feel like checks off all the boxes that Louisville is looking for in a head coach. However, right now, two issues. Number one, we don't know where the direction of this coaching search is going, so it's hard to tell how serious of any coaches are. But number two, it's yet to be seen, or if it will ever be seen, if Dana Altman is willing to relocate at 63 years old and come to Louisville. He is a Midwest guy, but he's been at Oregon for over a decade. Money would not be the issue for the Ducks program, etc. So good options, maybe not necessarily the most feasible candidates. I want to take this time now. We'll switch gears a little bit, go into women's basketball side of things, where the Louisville Cardinals lost on the road by a point to the North Carolina Tar Heels. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends at BetOnline. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs, and it remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Also want to thank you again, basically, for making us your first listen of the day. I do it every episode. I want to continue to do it because it really means a lot to me. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Transitioning over into the women's basketball side of things, the Louisville Cardinals, I talked them up, a ton on yesterday's episode, predicted a 10-point comfortable victory, and I was wrong. I was definitely wrong. The Cardinals lost at number 24 North Carolina last night, 66-65. One of those games to where I don't think that Louisville played overly bad, and I don't think that North Carolina played overly good. It was one of those to where Louisville had a 10-point lead in the second quarter. North Carolina kept it from being blown open in the third quarter. They cut the deficit, got the deficit to, I believe, 2 in the fourth, and they were just able to edge Louisville out. The key thing for me is the Cardinals' offense really stalled in the last 4 minutes of the game, even though they had it was 18 points or 15 points, one of the two in the last quarter, 15 points. It was one of those instances to where I think that it was somewhat of an uninspiring performance. They looked offensively just not the best night. Defensively, I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great as well. They forced 14 turnovers. They shot 9 less free throws, shot better from three-point line. North Carolina was 26% from the three-point line. They shot better from the field. The issue here is the fact that the Tar Heels out-rebounded the Cardinals by 10, 42-32. That definitely played a big factor. They had 13 offensive rebounds compared to Louisville's 5. Todd Williams led the way for the Tar Heels with 19 points. And then you also had Deja Kelly, who had 18 of her own and 9 rebounds to go along with. Actually, no, I'm looking at different. 4 rebounds. Usby had 9 points, 9 rebounds. So only 7 points from the bench. Hodgson was really the only one that played significant minutes. Not a ton of fouls. I thought that the officiating at the very end of the fourth quarter was kind of questionable. I thought that the call that sent North Carolina into the that basically gave them a lead, I thought it was an interesting call, or the calls that led up to it. But ultimately, it's just one of those games to where you wish you could have back, wish you could handle things differently. Louisville just didn't necessarily play good enough to win, and I think that at the end of the day, that's really all that it comes down to. There's no glaring there was no glaring need in this one outside of maybe the rebounding aspect of things. If there are any positives to take away, I mean, I'm not a moral victory guy. I say that all the time. Olivia Cochran had 14. Inksler had 11 and 8 and 4. Haley Van Lith continued her solid streak. She had 17, shot the ball 7 for 13. Kiana Smith went 3 for 12. That's the big thing for me is the fact that Kiana Smith, outside of that game against Notre Dame, she's had some contests to where she hasn't necessarily been the most efficient and really hasn't necessarily been able to come around to find her shot. But ultimately, it's one of those to where, it sucks. It's one of, you would expect Louisville to win this game. North Carolina just came off a loss to Virginia Tech. They did play Notre Dame tough at home. They played North Carolina State tough at home. So playing in Chapel Hill is easier said than done. Louisville will look to bounce back on senior day to Virginia Tech. The thing that it does for the rest of the season is it makes the journey toward securing a number 1 seed in the tournament that much more difficult, because you already are splitting hairs. You have South Carolina, NC State, Stanford, all into consideration, and then you have teams like Indiana, was Iowa State, etc. So for Louisville, it really makes it to where you can't have any more hiccups for the rest of the regular season, and you're going to have to guarantee that you make the conference championship and then hope that teams around you lose unless you win the conference championship. If they win out into the NCAA tournament, then they're going to get a 1 seed. If they win the ACC conference championship while finishing the rest of the regular season undefeated, they're going to win it. They're going to get a number 1 seed, in my opinion. But ultimately, this makes things just a little bit more challenging. It seems like every year there's a game or even 2 to where Louisville has no business losing, where they don't necessarily play up to their standards, play a little, like I said, just not up to their standards. They had, 14 turnovers. So, like I mentioned, despite the team being able to capitalize on other teams, turnovers and forcing them to make mistakes, Louisville really isn't able to do that when they're turning the ball over just as much, if not more. If the assist-to turnover ratio would have been a little better as well. This is a 1-point loss, so you have to really kind of see where things went wrong. There's no better coach in the country, coming off of a loss than Jeff Walz in terms of getting his team ready to play. I'm not going to say that the team was unmotivated or anything like that. Obviously, there'd really be kind of almost no way to know that. I just thought at times, Louisville had the opportunity to run away with this one. They were up 10 in the second quarter, and they allowed North Carolina to start the third quarter with a little bit more urgency, and the Tar Heels had the lead to the deficit at 2. Going into the fourth, and the Louisville's offense just kind of stalled out. It was 62-61. Was it seemingly the last 3 minutes, and Louisville scored 4 points in the last 3 minutes, and that's something that these little things added up, and it's that you're that close to coming out on top. So Louisville returns to action on Sunday at home. Virginia Tech comes to town. The ranked Hokies will take on the Cards on Senior Day. We'll recap that matchup on Monday's episode of the show. The final segment of the show, I want to dedicate to previewing the baseball season, doing a little initial preview. This is going to be all eyes are on Louisville from the fan base, so to speak, with the team missing the tournament last season. We'll talk about everything you need to know after we talk about our friends at Built Bar. It's the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions. But not this year, though. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. If you haven't tried the Puffs, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting products. It's the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowing, etc. Not just a protein bar. They're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate, as are all of the other Built Bar products. They're low-calorie, high-protein, so you're able to replace your candy bar with these. They're better. And a typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. With Built Bar, 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. There are a ton of different flavors to choose from, so do yourself a favor. Don't wait any longer. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Once again, that's use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. BetOnline.com. Final segment of the show final segment of the week, really, is dedicated to the Louisville baseball team. They start their 2022 campaign today in Tampa. They'll have a little jamboree down there. It seems like they have every season. They have Charlotte today at 2:00. Tomorrow is South Florida, and Sunday they have Connecticut before returning home for a huge homestand. Overall, I think it's 56 games on the schedule. 35 of those are at home. So if you haven't, if you in years past, with the coronavirus and stuff, if you haven't been able to, head out to Jim Patterson to catch a game, definitely check out the team. They're going to be, I think they're going to have a bounce back year for a team that was ranked highly at one point in the spring of 2021 to a team that did not make the tournament. I think, there were struggles with the pitching staff. Our team got hit with COVID, injuries, etc. After talking with Dan McDonald for a feature interview with Cardinal Sports Zone just about a month ago, he told me that this offseason has been really unique because the team and the coaching staff and the guys are really eager to get out there and prove themselves. It adds a little bit more fire, add a little bit more fuel to the fire, so to speak. But this is an interesting year. This is one of those to where you don't have an Alex Benelis or a Henry Davis or a star entering the preseason have their eyes on. So it's one of those to where Dan McDonald told me, he's like, look, it's not a typical Louisville team coming into the season. They are ranked 26th. They're just outside of the top 25. So you have to consider that. But for me, what I took away most from that interview with him is the fact that he said we have, juniors and seniors, upperclassmen that have been waiting in the wings just for their opportunity, and you're going to know about some here in the spring. Two names that he thought were primed for breakout season. That's a left-handed pitcher, Michael Persecki, and infielder Dalton Rushing, who probably will be the starting catcher for opening day, to start the season. You lose Henry Davis, you lose Alex Benelis. It's next man up mentality for this program. Christian Knapczyk, the second baseman / shortstop, wherever they decide to play him at, he's been a guy that McDonald has kind of zoned in on as a player that could have a breakout season. Batted just under 300 last year as a true freshman. Very solid defensively as well. Some other guys, Dalton Rushing, Ben Bianco, Cam Masterman, Levi Usher, Ben Metzinger. All these guys are going to be relied upon to have solid seasons, to take the next step forward in their development and be able to pick up some of the slack offensively. And then there's going to be some other key positional battles with there not being a set star in stone, so to speak, for this team coming into the season. Everything's pretty much up to competition. And even Dan McDonald said, he's like, look, competition drives this program. It's what this program is built on. It's one of the pillars of the culture of this program. We're going to see some opening weekend battles in the first half of the season to where, we might see some guys struggle. It might take some time to see what guys work best in the lineup, etc. So you're going to see those guys kind of, stick right away. Will Cook is another guy, true freshman. You could see some innings from him, in the batter's box and stuff like that. Pitching wise, there's a little bit more uncertainty. You lose pretty much the whole starting rotation from a year ago. Glenn Albany's, battled injury all season. Michael Kirian, moves from his closer role to basically the Friday starter. He is gone. Adam Elliott is gone. Luke Smith is gone, etc. You lose those four guys. Luke Seed, who usually spent time last year as a midweek starter, he's going to be a guy that probably will get the nod on Friday. If not, he's definitely going to be in the weekend rotation. We talked about Michael Persecki, a guy in the first two seasons at Louisville, struggled with command here and there, gave up some big earned run numbers, but had a very good season in the Cape Cod Summer League, was an all-star, so he's one to focus on. You also have guys like Carter Lohman, who is a captain, Tate Keener, the Lexington native southpaw, Jared Poland, a righty who's been a guy that has gotten some stuff. Will Koger, apologize if I'm botching that. The Bardstown true freshman, one of the top freshmen coming in the 2022 class. It's a great recruiting class coming in for Louisville. He could be a guy that gets some time as well. For those looking for great baseball coverage, Justin Kruger from Cardinal Sports Zone, Matt McGavick from Sports Illustrated, and Matt Sefcovic. Matt, I apologize if I'm butchering your name, man. I've never understood how to say it, so correct me if I'm wrong. Sefcovic, from SB Nation Card Chronicle. All three of those guys have tremendous baseball coverage, very solid minds. Third and Central, between the two Matts, is a podcast hosted by those two guys. It's a great listen if you're a Louisville baseball fan or if you're looking to get into being a Louisville baseball fan. So it's going to be a season to where the team might struggle early on. I expect this team to be playing its best ball as the tournament rolls around. Kind of an unexperienced team, but with a ton of talent. It's just a matter of seeing which guys rise to the forefront, and competition is driving all. So I truly expect this team to bounce back in the 2022 season. Before we get out of here, a couple quick shout-outs. First, the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. You can get that at cardinalsportszone.com. Also, the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q with handicapping expert analysis from Lee Sterling. You can check that out on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcast. But that's going to wrap up this Friday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.